I found myself sitting in that courtroom staring at Sophia, and it felt like the bizarre scene from some low-budget sitcom. I had been prepared for this moment, prepared for years, but nothing could have fully equipped me for the depth of her cruelty. I had been the one to fight for our marriage, to try and salvage whatever was left. Yet, I had always been on the receiving end of her biting remarks. But this time? This time, she delivered a blow that felt almost surgical in its precision. "Ryan, you're like a workhorse," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Easy to ride, but utterly pointless in the end." The courtroom erupted in laughter. I could feel the warmth creeping up my neck, turning to heat, spreading to my ears, and finally settling deep in my chest like an angry fire that had just been lit. My nails dug into my palms, my fists clenched beneath the table, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't give her the satisfaction. Sophia always had a way of cutting straight to the bone. But this wasn't just a jab in our relationship, it was a deep cut into my dignity. That remark, in its simple cruelty, encapsulated everything she had ever thought of me. For years I had worked 2 jobs to support her lavish lifestyle. I sacrificed nights out, drove the same beat-up car, and wore the same faded suit for 3 years just to keep up with her need for the latest gadgets. And now, in front of everyone, I was reduced to nothing more than a workhorse. I scanned the room. Her lawyer sat back, grinning, obviously pleased with her viciousness. The judge remained stoic, neutral as always. The gallery? They were entertained as if they were watching a daytime drama. To them it was all a spectacle, a juicy tale to gossip about later. But for me it was a punchline to a tragedy that had spanned 6 years of my life. The sting wasn't just in the words themselves, it was in the realization that for all the time I had spent trying to build a partnership, Sophia had always been on the sidelines, waiting for the next best thing to come along. When the judge called for a recess, I seized the opportunity to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the courtroom. I stepped outside and leaned against the cool, stone wall, gasping for air. It was the first time in months I allowed myself to feel it all, the shame, the anger, the utter disbelief. How could someone I loved so deeply tear me down so effortlessly? And yet, in an odd way, there was a sense of liberation in it. She had said what she had likely been thinking for years. No more pretending, no more second-guessing myself. It was time to stop trying to fix something that was already broken. I stood tall, straightened my tie, and looked at my reflection in the nearby window. There I was, the so-called workhorse, still standing despite everything. Exhausted, yes, but stronger than she had ever given me credit for. As I re-entered the courtroom, a decision settled over me. If Sophia wanted a performance, I was going to give her one, but not the one she expected. I was calm now, composed. Let her tear me down all she wanted, but I wasn't going to let her destroy me. The same tired narrative continued. Her lawyer repeated the workhorse comment, laying the groundwork for their weak argument. Sophia leaned back in her seat with that smug, confident look, certain she had already won. But then my attorney Claire stood and everything shifted. She methodically tore their argument apart, piece by piece. Bank statements, receipts, photos, every sacrifice I had made was laid out for the court to see. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Claire asked me if I wanted to speak. I stood up slowly, straightened my tie, and addressed the room. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Sophia called me a workhorse, and she's not entirely wrong. I worked harder than she'll ever know to build the life we had. But those sacrifices? They weren't for me. They were for us." I paused, allowing the weight of my words to hang in the air. The gallery, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Sophia likes metaphors," I continued. "So let me give her one. Yes, I am a workhorse. But not because I'm weak or disposable. It's because I'm a weight-bearer. I don't give up, no matter how heavy the burden." I did something unexpected. I slowly removed my jacket, unbuttoned my shirt, and revealed the scars and calluses on my arms. Years of hard work were etched into my skin. "This," I said, pointing to the marks on my arms, "is what it means to be a workhorse. These scars represent the sacrifices I made while Sophia was busy spending money on luxuries. And yet, she mocks me as if I did nothing." I locked eyes with her, and for the first time, I saw her confidence falter. "Here's the truth," I said, my voice growing stronger. "The condo, the vacations, the life you flaunted on social media, those were my sacrifices. And now, you want to take away what little I have left. But let me be clear, I'm not a roadblock. I'm a survivor." The gallery, once alive with laughter, was now eerily silent. I could feel the weight of every eye on me. The laughter from earlier had been replaced with a heavy stillness. I turned to the judge, finishing my statement. Not even the woman I once loved can destroy what I've built. As I buttoned my shirt and returned to my seat, the room remained motionless. Sophia's lawyer looked stunned, trying to regain their footing, while even Sophia herself seemed pale, her smugness completely shattered. Claire leaned over and whispered, "That was brilliant." For the first time in years I felt free. Vulnerable, yes, but free. Sophia had underestimated me, believing she could control the narrative. But the truth had a way of breaking through, and today the truth had finally come out. I returned to my seat, feeling the weight of what had just unfolded. Claire gave me a slight, approving nod, but the rest of the session passed in a blur of legal jargon and formalities. There was something different in the air now, a shift in the courtroom dynamic. For the first time, it felt like the power was no longer in Sophia's hands. The judge turned toward her, his voice steady but firm. "When we resume, I will address the evidence," he said, his tone carrying authority. "The evidence against you is compelling, Mrs. Sophia. I suggest you carefully consider your next course of action." Sophia's face went rigid, a mix of dread and simmering anger flickering behind her cold exterior. She didn't respond, but her clenched jaw and the way her eyes flicked nervously between me and the judge told a different story. I caught Claire's eye as we made our way out of the courtroom, and she whispered, "You've got them on the ropes." I nodded but didn't feel like celebrating just yet. There was still much left to do, still decisions to be made. Yet for the first time in months I could breathe. I had caught a glimpse of the truth, and the walls that had once confined me felt like they were crumbling. Sophia's well-rehearsed facade had started to fracture, and it was becoming clear that the truth was no longer on her side. When the hearing resumed, the tension in the room was palpable. Sophia's attorney had clearly worked frantically overnight to salvage their case. Papers were shuffled in frantic haste, and murmured discussions buzzed beneath the surface. Every now and then the lawyer would shoot me glares that could have burned a hole through steel. Meanwhile, Sophia sat across the room, poised as ever, her makeup flawless, yet her body language betrayed her. She was no longer the confident woman who had mocked me just days ago. Now she sat with her arms tightly folded, her head bowed, eyes darting anxiously between the judge and me. She looked like someone walking a tightrope over an abyss, afraid of what might happen if she lost her balance. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Without wasting any time, he addressed the court. "I have reviewed the plaintiff's evidence, including financial records, third-party testimonies, and responses. It is abundantly clear that Mrs. Sophia has acted in a manner detrimental to the integrity of this marriage." Sophia's head snapped up, her lawyer's hushed warnings falling on deaf ears. The judge continued, his words striking with precision. "This includes, but is not limited to, the misappropriation of joint funds, engaging in an extramarital affair, and attempting to falsify Mr. Ryan's testimony during these proceedings." You could have heard a pin drop. I could see the color drain from Sophia's face, her lips trembling, unable to find the words she so often used to control the narrative. The gallery, once buzzing with whispers, was now frozen in a heavy silence. The judge's gaze hardened as he continued, "Mrs. Sophia, your actions not only contradict your statements, but they also demonstrate a profound disregard for the integrity of this court." The tension was thick. Even her lawyers seemed to shrink into their seat as though they too could sense the tide turning. The judge's voice softened but carried an undeniable weight. "This court does not tolerate such behavior." He turned toward me, his expression now softer, acknowledging the courage I had shown. "Mr. Ryan, your allegations of financial and emotional exploitation have been found credible by this court. Throughout these proceedings, you have demonstrated poise and integrity." I nodded, though I kept my expression neutral. Inside, I felt years of humiliation, self-doubt, and pain start to dissolve, piece by piece, like the first rays of sunlight after a storm. The court outlined the financial penalties Sophia would face. She would have to repay a substantial portion of the marital assets and return the money she had taken. But the final blow came when the judge leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "The court acknowledges the damage your actions have caused, Mrs. Sophia. I strongly encourage you to reflect on the choices that brought you here." I watched her, her shoulders slumped, her once imposing posture now reduced to a heap of defeat. She looked as though she might cry, but instead she sat there in silence, her confidence disintegrating before everyone's eyes. Even her attorney murmured words like reputation and damage control under their breath. As the session adjourned, I gathered my things. On my way out, I passed Sophia's table and leaned in just enough to mutter, "Workhorse, huh?" She didn't even look up. She didn't respond, not a word, not a glance. Claire was smiling when I joined her outside the courtroom. "You should have seen her face when the penalties were announced," she said. For the first time in what felt like years, I let out a laugh. A real, unburdened laugh. The sound felt unfamiliar but liberating. The air outside was crisp and fresh, the sun shining brighter than it had in months. Sophia had believed she could shatter me, humiliate me, take everything I had worked for. Instead, her mask had been ripped off for the world to see. Walking down the courthouse steps, I felt lighter, like I had shed a heavy coat on a scorching day. The sting of Sophia's betrayal, once sharp and biting, now felt more like a dull bruise. There was still pain, but it was no longer the kind that consumed me. Claire and I discussed the next steps, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was elsewhere, already imagining what life might look like without the constant weight of Sophia's demands. For the first time in years, I was asking myself what I wanted. In the days that followed, I began reclaiming pieces of my life that I had abandoned for so long. I started removing traces of her from my home, the furniture she had insisted on, the absurd decor that never felt like mine. Slowly, the house began to feel lighter, more spacious, like it finally belonged to me. One day, while cleaning out a closet, I found an old sketchbook, something I hadn't touched in years. Sophia had always called it a childish hobby, something I should outgrow. But as I opened it and began sketching again, I felt like I was reconnecting with a part of myself I had lost. At first, the lines were shaky, uncertain, but with time, it felt like I was reclaiming something far more precious than just paper and ink. I also reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen or spoken to in years. "We were waiting for you to wake up, man," one of them said with a smile. As the weeks turned into months, I rebuilt myself, physically, emotionally, and socially. The man who stared back at me in the mirror was no longer the same one who had walked into that courtroom. He was stronger, freer, more self-assured. Forgiveness wasn't for Sophia. It wasn't about her at all. It was for me. Her betrayal was not a reflection of my worth but of her own selfishness, her inability to value what she had. And for the first time, I felt like I could move forward without the weight of her actions holding me back. The final court session wasn't what I had expected. It was the ending of a chapter, but more importantly, it was the beginning of something entirely new.